If a user starts off with a $45 or $49 a plan, the escalation all the way to 30, 40,000 a year. What were the stories in between?
So one thing we do a little differently there as well is if the cost of the overage is astronomical, let's say it's over 5 times the price of the plan, the base plan, we will hold that invoice. We won't automatically charge it. And then we'll flag it to sales, and they'll see if there's an opportunity there to make a deal with the customer.
That's interesting. Thrivers all around the world, welcome back to ThriveCast. I'm your host, Gururaj, and today we are diving into the inside story of the Amplitude's growth engineering plans and how they build the Amplitude Plus plan, in fact. We've had a previous guest, and they recommended Kelson. So welcome, Kelson. Kelson is the head of growth engineering from Amplitude. He comes very highly recommended by many Amplitude insiders, some of whom have been on our podcast before. They tell me that he and his team were the key partners to the Plus launch team, who many of you know have conceived the PLG strategy, built the first versions, discarded and rebuilt their offerings over and over, I guess about 2 or 3 times. They also tell me that you can't become a head of growth engineering. It requires 3 things. It requires a good head, a strong background in the growth domain, and a rooted foundation in the software engineering field. And of course, Kelson has all of them. Of the 10 years he's been in the industry, he has been an engineer for 8 and in the growth domain for about 5+ years. By the way, to help me prepare for the introduction, I asked ChatGPT to give me 3 things to describe Kelson. It said, and I quote, "Kelson is the sultan of scale. He likes to use the word exponential more often than others in his team, and believes that self-serve starts at home," which is why, by the way, this is ChatGPT telling me, which is why he does his own dishes, clothes, and car wash, all in a self-serve way.
Nice.
I'm not sure how true this is. Let's ask him directly. Kelson, welcome to ThriveCast. What do you think of this introduction?
Hey there. Very, very interesting introduction. I can say all of those things are true, but yeah, appreciate the introduction. Again, my name's Kelson. I've been at Amplitude for about 4 years now, a little bit more. Joined early on the growth team and have been working on the team since. Over the last couple of years, have been working on the self-serve plan at Amplitude, and ultimately launched that last year, which we'll dive into. But super excited to be here, and thanks for the intro.
Okay, same here, Kelson. Kelson, let's jump right into it. I think in 2020, you joined Amplitude, and before that, you were a growth engineer at a company called as Funding Circle. And since then, you've had a meteoric rise within the Amplitude team. You've also built a team. You're not just a solo army. You have built a substantial team out there. Could you tell our listeners maybe a brief history of what was the state of affairs when you joined the Amplitude growth engineering team? I think at that time you had already dabbled a little bit with product-led growth. You had some kind of a self-serve plan. What were you brought in to do? Tell us a little bit about as you entered Amplitude. How were things at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I entered the growth engineering space fairly early in the sort of evolution of growth. So at that time, folks were still learning what does that really mean to be in growth. And so early in my journey, looks a little bit interesting, the types of things we were working on and doing. So I joined Funding Circle to work on their growth team. Was an early hire on that team. Funding Circle is really like a platform for small business loans. And so what's really important to them is their application funnel. And so really good use case for optimizing acquisition all the way to basically it's almost like a sign up, like a SaaS sign up is the way I think about it. But you just want to optimize every step of the loan application journey and minimize drop off. And so that's what I focused on for my first experience in growth. And that was really interesting, but I wanted to get deeper experience in a SaaS product working on PLG. And so looked around, ended up finding an opportunity at Amplitude. I joined Amplitude as the third engineer on their growth team. And at that time, Amplitude was very much figuring out what growth meant. So Tanner, who's the manager who hired me, brilliant guy, he was product manager, data scientist, could manage engineers, kind of could do it all, and really pitched the growth team to Amplitude's leaders and got that approved. And we spun up a growth team that I joined really early on. And when I first joined, we didn't have the clearest strategy. And so a lot of times we were just working on what felt most impactful, but could often be like core product features. We definitely built some core product feature stuff. But so early when I joined, we were really just figuring out what does it mean to be a growth engineering team and how does that fit into Amplitude? And that probably was my first year and a half at Amplitude, was kind of helping the team figure that out, working with various folks, and the team evolved very quickly into what it is today. So today we're a team of about 10 engineers, 3 product managers and 2 designers. So we're fairly large. When I joined, it was 3 engineers and sort of sometimes a PM and sometimes a designer. So it's changed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And at that time, I believe Amplitude already had I'm not sure what it was called, like a starter pack. And it was out there, maybe about 4 or 5 years before you even joined. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So Amplitude has been around for over a decade now, or roughly a decade. And, originally launched as a fully paid service. But one of the biggest things the company did early in its journey was launch a starter plan in 2015. And what was really big about this is it launched with 10 million events for free. So Amplitude is an analytics product. People want to send analytics events, and oftentimes you might be sending a ton of analytics events depending on your use case. And so giving out 10 million events for free was huge back in 2015. A lot of the competitors were, charging thousands of dollars for usage like that. And so that was a huge play early on before we even had a strategy around PLG. But that really set the stage for us to have like a really good freemium model and acquisition channel.
Was this 10 million events for free, was it used by, the free serve users who would come to your website, sign up to your product and start using it? Or was it mostly a tool for the sales-led teams who could go ahead and say, hey, the first 10 million events are free? How was it being perceived within the company at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's a little bit of both. But I think mainly it was sort of organic traffic that coming in from our marketing website into the product. And so a really big piece of it as well was like startups, for example. Let's just say Y Combinator startups, having that really cheap plan that you could get started on, self-serve with a really good size quota on it was big. And that really built a name for us in the startup community. And those folks were coming organically and building without talking to sales. But at the same time, this also gave sales a really good tool to allow folks to try out the product, see how it worked for them, and also help them build out POCs within their own sort of free product. And so it worked really well for that. But I would say primarily it was a self-serve use case from the start.
Got it. Could you describe maybe for the audience what would have been the infrastructure stack and on how Amplitude was doing the self-serve at that time using the starter pack? I'm guessing you probably had like in user registration, authentication, a whole bunch of other things. What was the stack? If you'd be able to maybe briefly describe it before we go to the next one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way Amplitude accounts work is basically you come in through a sign-up flow, and that's fairly typical. And then the first user who creates the account, that creates a what we call an org or an organization in one of our databases. In particular, that's a MySQL database, and that org is activated after the user verifies their email, sets their password, and then from there they need to go and invite users into the account. And so the stack is actually fairly simple. An organization to us is just a row in the database, and then users are connected to that through another database table. And that's because we're fully cloud based and not self-hosted. So it's actually fairly simple. And so building out that starter plan was relatively straightforward because really we just needed to build a sign-up flow that captured the information we needed, and then some logic to create those database records.
Got it. And I'm guessing behind the scenes, you had some kind of a multi-tenant analytics store that you'd use to manage all of your orgs, right? Not necessarily manage, but get all the data. Was there a high lift in building that up for every single user who would sign up? Because typically, I think your competitors at that time were completely sales led, and every single customer would have some kind of a deployment, infrastructure hosting deployment in the backend that the sales guy would call up to their ops team and they would go run some scripts and get the tenants created, and then the invitations were being sent. We were very different in that sense, right? You were allowing your end users to automatically sign up and establish an org activated. But I'm guessing you might have also had to go create some kind of a infrastructure tenancy, some kind of an isolation to manage the data for all of these customer events and run all the analytics for them. Was that more of a multi-tenant or a single tenant nature by itself, or was that much more simpler than that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's definitely a single tenant nature, but a little bit more. So the way Amplitude works is you take a snippet, drop that into your website, JavaScript snippet, or you might be hitting our HTTP API from one of your backends. Essentially, you're just sending data into Amplitude. And then from there, we have our own full proprietary in-house ingestion system. And so that, I think the biggest thing there is we needed to scale that up to be able to handle higher volume than we had historically been used to. And then we have our own internal columnar database, which is known as Nova internally. And a really interesting blog article on our website, if you're curious. But this is something we built in-house and continue to use to this day. But I think another thing just related to scale is with so many additional orgs being created and so much new data coming in from free customers, is we had to scale that out to keep query performance fast. But that's all within our own clusters and our own sort of contained system.
Got it. So maybe, I think maybe in the interest of time, we'll talk a little bit about, as we fast forward this from 2015, your organization went ahead with multiple iterations of the self-serve plan. Could you tell us a little bit about the introduction of the Amplitude Plus plan and what were the engineering and product challenges to implement such a gargantuan free for all self-serve? And you went with, I think, $49 or $45 monthly plan. How did you come about doing all of that? What were the challenges to build out all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to take a step back a little bit. So when I joined in 2020, one of the next projects we did in the PLG space was we launched a scholarship plan. And what this did is it allowed startups under a certain amount of funding, under a certain amount of employees, basically ones with small and qualified, to get a free year of a paid plan. At that time, we were giving them the growth plan. And that allowed us to build some infrastructure around piping data into Salesforce from non-paying customers, creating Salesforce opportunities, basically surfacing these leads to Salesforce and through to the sales team. And then at the end of the 1 year sort of free paid plan, which was actually had a value of like $24,000. So it's a really valuable plan. It's still around today. When they're done, try to convert them to growth. So that was one of the very, very early product-led sales motions we did. And actually laid a decent amount of infrastructure for the Plus plan, mostly around capturing data and surfacing that to sales team for the PLS sort of approach. But yeah, so in, early 2022 is when we kicked off the work around Plus. And at that point, it was a very early idea and something we strongly needed to prove out to the business as something that we should actually do. And so being a growth team, we looked at the problem and we thought, how can we build an MVP to this that allows us to start seeing if we can acquire customers, take an approach where we don't cannibalize any of our sales pipeline, and prove that this is a viable approach. And so we really, from that point, had to lay all of the foundations to be able to accept payments. So previously, any payment is going through an invoicing process because it's complex sales deals. So we had none of that. So spinning up a Stripe account, laying all the infrastructure for Stripe, and making that happen And then there were some internal business requirements to wire up Stripe and connect that with Salesforce. So we're not actually connecting Stripe with Salesforce, but essentially when things happen inside of Stripe, we pushed things into Salesforce. So the sales team knows what's going on. And then also connecting to some internal finance platforms. So NetSuite being a tool we use to push invoice data for like revenue reconciliation. So really had to lay that foundation before we could do much. And from there, we launched with an early experiment. So what we call the alpha phase. And this was targeted to a pretty small subset of our free customers, less than 1,000. And we had to do a ton of work here to make sure that we didn't surface the plus plan or the self-serve plan to anybody who had talked to sales or been exposed to sales, because there was a lot of concern within the company around cannibalization. Starting from a low price point, it's attractive. So that was actually much more complex than it sounds. We had to combine a bunch of data from Salesforce and some of our other marketing tools and then run some complex targeting in our experimentation logic to make sure customers weren't seeing these plans. And at the time when we launched in 2022, the company was using event volume as a sort of our main billing metric. And so we launched with two plans, one that was 5 million event volume, one that was 10 million event volume. And what made this particularly interesting is that the starter plan gets 10 million events for free, or it did at the time. That has changed since then. But if you look at that, you think, oh, I'm paying, but I'm not getting more volume, or I might actually be getting less volume. And so that was a decision that was made internally for some of the reasons I listed earlier around cannibalization, keeping customers interested in the growth and enterprise plans. So that was a very early experiment into that space, but it made things fairly interesting to explain value to customers. Our job became, how do we sell the features here and not the volume?
So let me break this down a little bit. So I was taking notes as we were speaking. I think 2015, I'm going back a little bit.
Yeah.
2015, you had a starter plan. Somewhere between 2015 and 2022, you had this scholarship plan where you experimented with product-led sales. And maybe a question on that, and by the way, I wasn't aware of the scholarship plan. That was more, I'm guessing, it wasn't on your website. I mean, yeah, you had to fill a form, I guess. And then only the ones who had filled the form, who had met the criteria, you would offer them the scholarship plan. Would that be right to say?
That's right. Yep. So it is on our pricing page on our website, and anybody can apply. You just have to meet the criteria, essentially be a smaller startup with not a ton of funding.
Got it. So it was invitation only, or apply to get the plan, but not necessarily it's a self-serve, sign up and get it, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, you didn't have to talk to anybody, but you would apply and you would wait in the background for an approval, and that would come through. But it wasn't an instant. You get it right then.
Got it. I think now I understand why that was very important for you to experiment with product-led sales, because the application itself would, go into the sales queue and they'll see that, hey, this particular startup, they've been funded. It's very likely that they would buy a couple of months after they're using it. That's great to know. And I think your audience will probably also appreciate that the experimentation from a freemium plan to an in-between plan, which is more of a product-led sales, where you had some onboarding, some way to figure out whether this makes sense, what's the capacity allocation, in this case, your 10 million volume or whatever that might be. Fast forward, you wanted to go completely self-serve with the Plus plan. And you mentioned a couple of things, right? Let me bring that attention there. The first one is that it was publicly available it was going to be publicly available on your website. Anyone can put in their credit card or bank account and start with the plan. And there was no free trial for that, right? You automatically come in, you put in your credit card, and starting from that month, you were on board to a monthly payment fees. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And so when we launched back in the alpha stage in early 2022, it was public on the in-product pricing. So you had to be a customer who had signed up, joined Amplitude, and then saw the pricing page in product. Putting it on the public pricing page on the amplitude.com. That is what took us roughly 2 years or more to get to. And that was ultimately the GA launch in October of last year. And so it was available. You could see it in the product, but you had to already be using Amplitude.
Got it. Okay, that's an interesting choice. And I'm guessing that made sense because you were a sales-led company. When we talk to companies much smaller, they launch it directly on their website, and then the in-product comes in much later. Whereas you had to inverse this particular approach and make the in-product pricing much more prominent, which doesn't essentially cannibalize. I think that makes perfect sense now. Could you share with the audience on what was the struggle in building all of this? I mean, all of the Stripe integration, the Salesforce connection, getting the signals there, NetSuite, all the meters. That seems to be many of the things that can be done maybe today much more easily than 2 or 3 years back. So what was the struggle? What were the challenges in building out this particular plan? Meaning, why was Amplitude not being able to put this out a year earlier? Why 2023? Why not 2022 or 2021?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the answer to that is it's actually not related to technical challenges. We were able to spin up a self-working system, within roughly 3 to 4 months. I mean, there were additional challenges. We had to add the ability to upgrade and downgrade from plans, automated overage billing. This means you have to build out like a usage-based overage billing, and then integrating with all of our sales systems. So we're very sales-led, heavy sales-led company, and so there's a lot of systems in place around that. And the company was adamant about us integrating with all of those. And so,
of course,
historically, if you're starting from a PLG first, you're probably not going to have some of the systems that we do, but we did have to integrate with those. But I think what ultimately what took us 2 years to get to a launch was getting alignment internally and the team proving out that this was an idea that we should move forward with. There was a lot of skepticism within the company. What we had been doing on the sales-led side had worked really well for us. It got us to a place where the company could go public, and really some people didn't see a need for it and thought, we just need to optimize what we're doing on the sales-led side. And then there was a lot of concern around the way we would package our products. And so that is one of the technical challenges as well, was repackaging and restructuring all the features. But that was a concern as well. How do we know what is appropriate to give away for a low price point? And how do we know what to hold back? So let's say SSO as an example. There's some consideration about, do we give that away at a lower price point? Absolutely not, ultimately was the decision. And, that could change. But just as an example, we kind of had to consider that with each of our features.
Got it. And why don't we talk a little bit about maybe 3 or 4 things that you mentioned. The first one is the in-app nature of things that you build, like the in-app pricing. I've seen many demos on Amplitude. You have in-app explore demos, meaning anyone can sign up to your product and explore how Amplitude solves the problem. There's a fully loaded analytics engine with all the data. You have to go probably build all of that. I'm guessing that may not have been much of a lift. Then did you have to invest in simplifying your onboarding? And you had now 4 products. Starter plan and the scholarship plan had only 1 product, but with the Amplitude Plus plan, now you have 4 products, right? You had your CDP, your experimentation, your analytics, and probably one more that's skipping my head. Now you have 4 products, and you have features across these 4 products coming into the single Amplitude Plus plan. So, which is why you're telling me that packaging of this particular Plus plan was a lot more challenging because you have to go select which of these features. So let's start with the in-app set of things. You build the in-app pricing plan. I'm guessing it's all purely Stripe, webhooks, checkouts, elements, all inside. Would that be correct to say?
That's right. Yep. So the way that we approached it, again, taking it from how can we get to MVP, it was using all of Stripe's out-of-the-box tooling. So Stripe Checkout, Stripe Billing Portal, Stripe Webhooks. That was the core of the way we built it. And the pricing page was something that we built out as well. And that just pulls in pricing data from Stripe.
Got it. What did you do to all of the users who signed up but would never activate, not go through any motion? You would still ask them to pay, or you'd only ask them to get onto the pricing plan only after activation? How did you manage that?
Yeah. So are you referring to customers coming in from a sign up, like full sign up, or from the checkout funnel?
From the sign up.
Okay.
Let me back out a little bit. In a few podcasts that we've seen, the biggest worry that most SaaS builders have with self-serve is the surge of signups are coming in, and the tenant infrastructure that they have to spin up in the backend for that. And then these signed up users, almost 98, 99% of them don't do squat, right? So they don't activate. And there's infrastructure that's lying in the background, which is associated to this particular user or the tenant. But that's pretty useless because these users are not coming back. So how did you manage to keep efficiencies of your backend infrastructure aligned with the value proposition of the product, right? So if you're signing in, you get this. If you get activated and you go through a trial or you do a checkout, then you get this thing. So how did you manage the features to upgrade, parity, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good question. So fortunately, we're launching the starter plan back in 2015. It gave us the opportunity to get ahead of some of these things because we saw that surge in signups, and we were, and also combined with the way that we launched, right? With the internal in-product pricing page, you would never know anything about the self-serve plan unless you happen to land on that internal page. So we, initially didn't see anything from like a public launch sort of traffic. But I think to your point, there are many users who just sign up and drop off. And you also ended at something earlier, which is, Amplitude has a fair amount of products. And one of the things we've always struggled with is the onboarding side of things. And being a very technical product, having some of our products be pretty difficult to get going with, that is something that we are continuously working on. We've got some really cool stuff coming up to address, actually. But we saw this with the original launch of Starter Plan. We saw this with Scholarship. We saw this with Plus. People have a relatively challenging time getting going. Obviously, there's many people who are just fine, but folks who are non-technical tend to have a harder time. And so that was an area we spent some time optimizing as well. We, like I said, still not where we want to be, but making some great progress there.
Got it. So 4 products, one plan. So did you have one single onboarding for all the 4 products? Or did you split the onboarding into 4 different onboardings or 4 different getting started, for one each for the product?
Yeah, so it's one onboarding flow for everything. And the thought behind that is all of our products require you to get started with analytics. This may not always be true, but when we launched, the value of, let's say, a tool like Amplitude Experiment, you need to have analytics data in order for you to be able to set up experiments that are targeting based on pure analytics data. So the tool only really becomes valuable once you've activated on analytics. Same with CDP, same with session replay, right? You have to be capturing analytics in order to capture sessions. And so we thought that, that was the highest value place to start, is let's get people to send data in, because that is having somebody send data in is the biggest signal that they will ultimately go on to use Amplitude and build a habit around it. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah.
Which essentially means that you are looking at what incentives can you bring them to the fore if they don't use the Amplitude course value proposition of analytics and sending the data. They may not be incentivized to go do the other products, right? So they won't necessarily be interested in experimentation or CDP or what may, unless until they get activated on the analytics. I think that's fair. Sorry, I cut you.
No, and spot on to what you're saying, like that they're not even going to be able to get much value out of those products. And so why overwhelm them early in their journey? Let's get them what they need now, and then we can onboard them to some of the other products when they're ready.
Got it. And maybe you started off with the sign up or the acquisition part of it. But what happens if they want to cancel product midway? So they might be on a monthly recurring plan, and somehow they decide to cancel. Do they have to call up your teams, or do they have to, is there an in-app cancellation or in-app upgrade?
Yeah.
that the users can do without talking to your sales reps?
Yep. So the number one, or maybe, top 5 sort of guiding principles here when we built this was we don't want any customer to have to talk to anybody. And so we built out the ability to cancel in product. So that is just using Stripe's billing portal, actually. So we send them off to Stripe's billing portal. They can turn off their subscription and it won't renew. What that does mean is there's no refunds upon cancellation. And if you sign for an annual plan, you will have to wait till the end of the year. So that customers can cancel without talking to anybody. With that being said, we have experienced customers who change their minds or want to make certain changes to their plans. And so we do offer email support, and we do sometimes help folks manually, but it's very few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And I'm guessing if they go to the Stripe portal, cancel it, you would get notified by Stripe and you would do all the cleanup and all of the deactivation that's necessary. I think that's probably much more standard there. But what happens, I'm trying this story with the larger Amplitude sales-led growth, right? Because your Amplitude was very well known for larger deal sizes, and the self-serve deal sizes were probably much smaller in $50 to $100 a month range, and over time it started escalating. So how did you manage the value escalation, right, all the way for the users to be able to be ready to pay, let's say $30, $40, $50,000 a year, right, from $50 a month? What did you have to go build within our product? I know we've heard the story from the marketing side on what's the value proposition and the things that had to be built, but were there any differently? You had to build the product differently to manage the quotas, particularly that, hey, you hit this quota, pay more, or here's your invoice on the usage. So tell the story about if a user starts off with a $45 or $49 a plan, the escalation all the way to $30,000, $40,000 a year. What were the stories in between?
Yeah, that is launched without overage billing or really any sort of consequences for overage. People will buy that. They'll buy the plan they think they need at first, and then they very often will just go over that limit. And if there's no consequences, that they're not really motivated to change their behavior. And so we knew immediately that we needed to notify customers about overages. And the first experiment that we took there was just emailing them. And so we fortunately have a task that runs twice a day, and it computes overages, percentages, because we do alert customers at 80%, 90%, 100%. We want customers to know ahead of time. And this runs for every customer. So we integrated the self-serve plan into that. And then just notifying them, we watched and saw what changes of behavior do we see just from these notifications. And surprisingly, we saw upgrades happening for these folks.
Interesting.
So it really, just the mention of overage billing really drove a lot of upgrades. Ultimately, we did build out a full overage billing system. And so this is a cron job that runs a couple days after the end of the month. It goes back, computes all of the usage for the previous month, and determines if it should bill overages, and then creates an invoice in Stripe, and then automatically charges that invoice and closes that out. So one thing we do a little differently there as well is if the cost of the overage is astronomical, let's say it's over 5 times the price of the plan, the base plan, we will hold that invoice. We won't automatically charge it, and then we'll flag it to sales, and they'll see if there's an opportunity there to make a deal with the customer.
That's interesting. Let me ask a few things around that subject. You decided to use email as your delivery system to notify about overages and the potential upgrades. I'm guessing that email will have a CTA to go to Stripe or whatever your in-app product and being able to upgrade from there. Did you also build out the in-app product messaging that, hey, you have hit the quota, and if they're already logged in, they can do it there and then rather than waiting for an email?
Yeah, so we did both. So we have like in-product butter bars that would drop down some notifications, but very often we find that the buyer may not actually be using Amplitude that much.
Correct.
Yeah. So that can be the best way to get a hold of them. And yeah, there was a CTA in there that dropped them into our checkout flow and suggested sort of the next tier up for them.
Got it. And this is an interesting experiment, maybe an interesting insight. 5x of the previously paid plan, so you hold back the invoicing. Otherwise, you automatically send the invoice and then see if they paid. If they don't pay it, then probably I'm guessing they will call support and negotiate. And you probably have to have an email or ticketing support for them to go negotiate down. At the end of the day, it may not be that high. I mean, $45, 5x is $250, and above that, less than $300 a month. So you can even maybe grant them, you can ignore it as well, but you decide to hold back and then send it to the sales team for a potential conversation. So that was good. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, yeah, no, I was just going to say our approach has always been customer first, and we like to understand. We'll reach out to the customer and let them know what happened and see what their explanation is. Sometimes there can be implementation mishaps or misunderstandings in the way certain things work. And so we really want to hold customers, and our goal is not to make money off of overage invoices. And so that's really been our approach. And so, yeah, we're happy to work with customers and make exceptions and those sort of things.